The essence of gospel humility is not thinking more of myself or thinking less of myself. Rather, it is thinking of myself less. I remember it was the end of spring break during my junior year of college, and I was sitting in Starbucks. I think it was a rainy day, and I had just picked up a copy of this book and thought, you know what, why not give this a read? Because I don't have anything else to do. It's the end of spring break, and I'm getting ready to go back to school. Tim Keller focuses on 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and 4, and from that he really pulls three main themes from that passage. Those three themes become the anchor of this book for him, and those are the natural condition of the human ego, the transformed sense of self, and finally, how we can get to that transformed sense of self. In this video, I'm going to focus mainly on giving an overview and summary of this book, and then towards the end, I'm going to share some other features about this book, as well as my recommendation about this book. After watching this video, if this book interests you, check out the link in the comments or the description so you can get a copy for yourself. With the natural condition of the human ego, Tim Keller talks about four specific things: that the human ego is empty, that it's painful, that it's busy, and that it's fragile. When it comes to the ego being empty, Tim Keller says that only God can truly fill the ego. Tim Keller says that the ego is painful when it's overinflated or underinflated. In this part, he gives a really neat analogy of our bodies and how when our bodies are working properly, we don't really notice them. He mentions about our toes and our feet and how when they're working as they should be, you don't think, oh wow, my toes are really working well right now to keep me balanced and to help me walk. He then connects that to our egos and says our egos should ultimately be like that. They don't draw attention to themselves. However, he does say that our egos are busy in that they are always seeking to draw attention to itself. Our egos want to succeed, they want to outperform, they want to beat out the competition and rise to the top. And he says that they're fragile because if it's an overinflated ego, it's on the brink of bursting and causing destruction. He wraps up this first section saying that ultimately our egos are like black holes. They're insatiable, they're unable to be filled fully. Tim Keller then pivots to the idea of the transformed sense of self and then how we can get there. He looks back at 1 Corinthians 3 and notices how Paul really doesn't get his self-worth from what other people are saying about him. He doesn't get his worth from what the Corinthians may think about him. Ultimately, he gets it from what the gospel says about him. It's at this point where Dr. Keller says that quote about what the gospel humility looks like. It's not thinking more of myself or thinking less of myself, but rather it's just thinking of myself less frequently, less often, and ultimately not at all. He also says that our ego should be filled, but not puffed up. Because just as an overinflated ego is dangerous, an underinflated and low self-esteem is also dangerous too. Because neither of those are filled to the right level that they should be. But how do we get to that transformed sense of self? Well, Tim Keller argues that it's by understanding the gospel and what Jesus did on the cross. He says that Christianity is unlike any other religion in that the verdict precedes the performance. All other religions say you have to perform, you have to do this, you have to live by this standard in order to then reach that verdict of, all right, you did a good job, you can reap the rewards of your works. But in Christianity, it says Jesus performed. Jesus went to the cross and did what needed to be done. Therefore, and through that, you can perform after. You don't need to perform to receive the verdict, but through Jesus' verdict, it causes us to want to live out what he says, what his commands are, and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We don't perform to receive the verdict, but rather we perform because of the verdict that's been set. I think something that's really challenging specifically about this book is that I read this 2 years ago, and there are things in this book where I know that I haven't applied or can see in my own life that I'm still struggling with. I think about that second part of this book, the transformed view of self, where Tim Keller is talking about Paul and how he doesn't get his self-worth from others. And he even says that Paul does not look to the Corinthians or to any human court for the verdict that he is a somebody. Paul's self-worth, his self-regard, his identity is not tied in any way to their verdict and their evaluation of him. When I first read this, I underlined it, I starred it, but I still find myself struggling to not let the opinion or the ideas of other people sway me in my decisions or in how I interact in situations and circumstances. Even reading this line right here, it says, "In fact, his identity owes nothing to what people say." It is as if he is saying, I don't care what you think. I don't care what anybody thinks. And I can pinpoint the areas of my life where that's not the case for me. This book is only 45 pages long, and there's large font in this, making it pretty easy to read. I thought I was going to read it in a couple of days, maybe even a week. But once I started reading this, I just flew through it because of how challenging and convicting it is, and the way Tim Keller argues what it means to forget yourself. I like to look at this book as something that's a low investment but brings a high return. It doesn't really cost a whole lot because it's so short. You can read it in one sitting, and there's even some reflection questions at the end of the book that you can ask yourself and process either by yourself or with a group of people. I recommend giving it a read if any of this video inspired you or challenged you or interests you on looking more into what it means to live in humility and a gospel-centered sense of self. Check out the link down in the comments or in the description, and on the screen now is a video that I would love for you to watch next. So join me in that video.